A short section here. My name is Tom Sinnott. I work with Winfield United. I've sat at the kitchen table with a bunch of you guys here. My job, I work on seed and crop protection now, or before I was only seed for Southwest Indiana. And you'll see we got a couple of the signs up here. Superior Ag is going to make a little more aggressive play for seed business going forward. And the reason for that is, sometimes it's a little touchy for us because seed is so sensitive. We work with a lot of farmer dealers, and those farmer dealers are a lot of times are great customers of ours as well. And so we've tended to kind of say work closely with the guys, but not be too pushy. But we've seen a lot of things through the answer plot system and things that we're doing with all the corn plots with your guys' help, that the information that we're gleaning from these hybrids, we're able to see like how can we match those up with your management style. And that being said, you think of you're building a house. You're not going to pay one contractor to come and lay a foundation for you and pour your footer and then go talk to somebody else about building a house on top of it. That's kind of where we're at on the hybrid selection, because oftentimes we don't know what those little quirks are. We may be running out over a little bit of the unstable part that's not the foundation that hybrid's built on. Everything in our lineup and all the brands that we sell are fully tested. And so like Todd mentioned up front, we talk about big rocks. These are the big rocks in hybrid selection here. So most importantly, or one of the most important things, is your fertility and drainage. We can't get a hybrid that has a really fibrous, shallow root profile on a guy that's got like really poor fertility, because we need that bigger, massive root system to go down deeper into the ground. Drainage is the same thing. You want to keep a shallower rooted hybrid on wet natured soils because it's going to be doing all its work up here. And if you get a deep rooted hybrid, what happens is in that wet feet, that water that stays in the soil keeps that root from going down, and you'll see that hybrid reflect a little differently when it gets pretty hot and dry. Nitrogen practices, this is probably the biggest one and where we've seen the most value out of the hybrids in our lineup with the testing and screening that we're doing. We have some of the hybrids that take up 70% of their nitrogen up until tassel. So if you're a guy who does pre-plant ammonia, you put it all out up front or it goes all through your planter, that's the kind of hybrids that are going to fit you best, because you get all those saturated soils in May and early June, right, where we get that 5-inch rain that comes through. For each day that your ground lays wet after 2 days, you can lose up to 10% of your nitrogen every day. And so that's happening multiple times during that time of the year. And if our hybrid is one that's not taking up its nitrogen right then, we're missing out. Because on the other spectrum, we have hybrids, and we'll get into some of the hybrids specifically in a little bit. Some of the hybrids take up 70 to 73% of their nitrogen post-tassel. So whenever, we never see that really firing show up, it's going to reflect in the grain. And so if your neighbor has a hybrid that he loves and he recommends it to you, you may or may not like it. And you may be like, I don't know what the hell he's planting, what I'm doing is better. That information that we have on the hybrids helps. Management practices, this is fungicide. Obviously, we know each hybrid has a little bit different response to fungicide. There are different ones that have responses to ALS chemistry. So if you buy a hybrid from dealer A and it's got a sensitivity to ALS, and you've got vines and we put peak on it, that hybrid's going to negatively affect that. So that's something that we're not getting in. Price constraints, I hate this one because it happens every time, right? We come out to the farm, and I have never been to a farm. I've been to a lot of your guys' places, and has anybody ever told me I was too damn cheap? No. All that stuff's way too expensive. And so if you're setting that limitation, and we know we're coming to your farm and we have to be $240 a bag, we can do that, but we can't do that probably and best fit your acres. And so what happens is we're trying to pick the best hybrids that we can get for that value for you, but we're probably missing out on a bunch of that. So please, when you guys do that, I know you're going to beat us up anyway or beat your dealer up. Do that after you decide which hybrids you're going to plant, not before. Population comfort zones, everybody's is different. Your planting and harvest timing, some of the hybrids that we absolutely love don't come out of the ground very fast, even though they come out evenly. So we're going to make sure we're not going to be positioning that hybrid at the very start of your planting window if you're a guy that likes to do early April planting. If you're a guy that waits a little bit and you're more like in the 20s of April, then that problem kind of starts to go away because you're getting that soil warmth up where the Mother Nature is letting that hybrid grow faster.
So one of the other big advantages we believe we have relative to Superior Ag would be our different companies we're allowed to work with. and kind of highlight some of those. So if you think about balancing your mix out, talking with Tom, and we think about incorporating not only just a DeKalb hybrid or a Cropland hybrid, we also have the flexibility to pull in other genetics, whether it's from a Corteva or a Syngenta along with Bayer. So balancing that whole portfolio allows us to have a pretty good stance and stay super competitive and do the best we can for your farm. The other part of it is when we think about the traits. Traits are starting to become a very popular topic as we think about it. How many of you walked your corn this year and found a little corn earworm? Anybody? It's out there. We got to look for it. Tom, yesterday, I think you told me, I got to look this way evidently. Yesterday you told me that they take out two kernels is how many bushel?
For every 2 to 3 kernels that they take out on the end, even if they just damage it, that's a bushel of corn. So if you think about that, when we just see that little bit of tip up there at the top getting chewed on, that's affecting us. And whenever VT Double Pro came out, I mean, it was Thor's hammer on that, right, Chad? So we were getting really good control with that. Well, Mother Nature has a way around things, and the one that survived that mated with the one that survived the other corn, and therefore the next ones are a little bit more resistant. So we're seeing more feeding there. So that's why things are coming out. Like, this might not be the only field day you go to. They're talking about next generation earworm control. A lot of that is based on the Viptera trait that's from Syngenta that's been incorporated in a lot of the other seed companies' bags. We already have that, and we've had it for 2 years. So if we start talking about Tricepta, then that gives you another additional mode of action on that that's like crazy strong compared to what we were getting out of the VT Double Pro. So don't be surprised if a lot of your seed mix has that Tricepta portion in there as well. So
yeah, to Tom's point, it's definitely something that's beginning to be a hot topic is our traits and our earworm protection. But to kind of dive home a little bit on Tom's point, we'll try to hit a little bit on the price, and slide's kind of busy. But here, there's a lot of data on this slide. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into this. A lot of times when we go and we see plot data, it's one plot, it's always the best hybrid. So this is our 5-year summary in terms of the advantage side and our 2022 summary of what we had plot seed for our Superior Ag brand. Most of these have 18, 20 plots involved into them with a variety of soils. And that doesn't even include the data we get from our answer plot right here that we're all at today. But so to kind of drive some of that home, if you look at it in terms of some of these advantages, big one you want to drive home, and it's to Tom's point, is we talk about cost all the time. Guys, our challenge every single one of us, every Superior Ag representative, if you work with us and you work with us on chemistry and nitrogen and you're not talking seed, I challenge you to find somebody else that knows more about your farm other than yourself. Because there's a lot of times we're out there making recommendations for you if you buy seed, because we already know how you're going to take care of it, what kind of soil it's going on, because we do the fertility, we're doing the nitrogen management. Challenge us, because we're showing right here that we can provide a lot of dollars to your bottom line by knowing your farm, getting the right hybrid on that farm, and knowing the population. One thing we didn't do, but you certainly see it in this plot, I think we all agreed it's certainly important getting the hybrid on the right acres, extremely important when it comes to our farm. Back behind us, there's hybrids planted at 30,000 and 38,000. I'd tell you, challenge you, if you go in there, it's also super important to make sure we get that population right and know what kind of dirt, know what that nitrogen is we have underneath of it, because you can see tip back in hybrids and some of this over here where it shows, sometimes that population stretch wasn't necessarily the right call. So, but extremely challenge us and challenge every one of us in the room to work with you. I challenge you to try 12 bags. If you've never done anything, 6 bags, put it in a side-by-side. We'll help stand behind it, we'll help place it, we'll get it on the right acre. Doesn't even have to be the best acre. Just put us on something and challenge us. So, Tom, you want to go?
So that we're going to jump into a few of the hybrids. We'll see how many we get through. We're going to start in lower maturity and work our way up on some of the unique characteristics. The first one we're talking about is DeKalb 6270. I want you guys to kind of look down there to the right. There's 3 in a row that are really short. It's one of those. So when you see that hybrid, it's like, gosh, it doesn't look anything like these over here. Well, I can promise you that hybrid is every bit as tall if you had it dug out of the ground as one of these over here. So what's unique about 6270, and this is, I didn't have a backhoe to do this, and I don't think Bob would approve if I did, but when you get this hybrid and you pull it out, all the roots from this one, you get your fibrous roots here on the edge, and then underneath it, there's a bunch of roots and they're all going straight down. So when you have some really tough soils, all that stuff dries out on the top. If you have a hybrid that can really reach down deep in that, you're not going to see that moisture zone that it's struggling so much. You won't see that on a hybrid like this near as much. So this is a top choice for rolling acres or really drouthy ground. You can tell it does have a little bit of ear flex, so that allows us to be in the moderate population range on that, which then helps that even more, right? Because if you already got moisture stress and you planted at 38,000, you turned up that knob, you're gonna make it worse. If you can drop this in at 30 to 32,000 on those acres, and Mother Nature treats you nice like it did this year with a little bit of rain, this is gonna have a lot more flex to it. The watch outs on this one is it is not super fast out of the ground. It is uniform, but like I mentioned earlier, this is one of the slower ones. So we're not gonna drop this in the end of March, first week of April. We're gonna wanna wait a little bit and maybe put this a little bit back in your slide deck on where you're starting and finishing. Really strong on southern rust. So this hybrid, if you had something that you just absolutely can't spray, you can put this there. But it is a little bit more prone to gray leaf spot. Well, we can control that on your post pass, right? We can kind of reset that and knock that down. So that's DeKalb 6270. The next one is also a 112-day hybrid. You guys have planted a lot of 5370 cropland in the past. You could put this in a 100-acre field all by itself in the middle of Iowa, and it's gonna have a nose on it like that. That's the genetics of this type hybrid. You can also see the hybrid has a little bit of a banana look to it. That curvature, that's also distinct to this genetics. We have a hybrid of 5208 that we've been looking for a replacement for this one for about 6 years, and the new one that came out wasn't as good as what we had, so we kept with it. It looks like 5208 from the cropland side is gonna touch all those acres. The biggest difference between the two, I would say, is as far as drought stress, this has a little bit more drought stress, so the places, like I mentioned with 6270, where we're putting it on really tough acres, we may lean back on this one here until we get some more information. I know last year, everywhere we put this, and it's on the slide up here, everywhere we put this one, it was 5 to 10 bushels better than 5370, but it wasn't a terrible year last year either, right? So we're just gonna slow that a little bit, but this will probably take up 60 to 70% of those acres. Nitrogen management, this one is moderate. So if you got pre-plant ammonia, or you guys, or even split applied nitrogen, it's gonna fit either of those platforms, this one will, the new one. The old one had a high response to nitrogen, so pre-plant ammonia, this one's gonna be looking for that nitrogen a little later, and it might not be there.
So the next hybrid, I'll try to slide over here, but so you guys aren't feeling like you're excluded, but I'm worried I'm gonna make the speaker go crazy. So the next hybrid is gonna be the DeKalb 6422. This is a brand new hybrid. We had it out in some, everybody got a few bags this year relative to Superior Ag Salesman. Had it in a lot of plots this year, but it's a kind of a broad acre. We start thinking, how many of you are familiar with like 6435, 6357? Most of you guys hopefully are pretty familiar with those in the DeKalb lineup. Those have been pretty sturdy. We kind of put them on those kind of average to above average hills, and they've done a pretty good job for us. So we're really excited about this. The one thing I will say, there's a call out, there's a watch out, is this wasn't the fastest thing coming out of the ground. We were kind of told, and we probably told you if you had a box this year or a couple bags, is to watch it. It should be faster than your 6435 coming out. I don't think it beat it by much. If it did, it was a half a day and nobody saw it. So still a little slower emergence coming out of the ground. One thing you really like about this, if you have it out, it is a beautiful dark green color. It's really good agronomics. You pull this and kind of study the rest of the plot. There's a few gray leaf spots on here, but very, very clean. Very, very clean. The other thing to look at is when we sit here and compare it to another one in the same DeKalb lineup, and we start thinking about weed control, and we start thinking about how much sunlight that corn plant's taking in, look at the differences in terms of the width across the leaf. So if we think about which one's gonna be able to capture more sunlight, pound in more yield, this 6422 should really be able to do that. It's a very dark, dark canopy when you start walking those rows of corn. The other advantage it has when it starts capturing this much sunlight and we keep it alive is we have really good kind of test weight, grain quality, kernel depth is really good on this hybrid. So as we think about it, one other call out for 114 day, this might be a little bit wetter than what we think it should be. We might have to give it a couple more days out in the field to finish drying down. But another super good hybrid, tremendous yield. I was talking to Tom because we had it very sparingly in some plots last year. It was at this plot. Last year, I think the average here for the corn at Dale was 260 something for this plot we're in right now. Last year, this hybrid did 290. So when we get a lot of the cropland data back, even in soybeans, like you take some of the Brevant 342 in soybeans, or you take the 40P and some of the NK beans, those percent of means is what we like to look at because that really tells us the story of how much yield this one has. those typically are 104, 103, 105. We look at those, we're like, man, we got to look at this hybrid, we need to plant it. This one last year was 107.9. And it won even in the next plot below that, where the plot average was 216, this did 239. So it's something to certainly keep a look at. And the good news is that we found out last year from DeKalb, it certainly sounds like we're actually going to have some of it. So it's not going to be quite like the 6835 yet we're going to talk about. But we actually sound like we're going to have plenty of it, and it's a very broad acre, super attractive, super healthy hybrid. The next one I want to talk about is 5550 Cropland, 115-day hybrid. If you planted much cropland, I'm sure you've had it on your farm. It's one of our go-to. It's steady. I would tell you it's not the most sexy corn out there. I had 6422 and 5550 on my drive home and to work every day across from each other. And 6422 is that dark, beautiful green. 5550 is kind of pale. It's kind of like, I don't know. This is one, plant it, have confidence in it. Don't go kernel count it, because you go kernel count it, you're going to find 16 and 18s, and you're like, thought you guys said this corn was going to really yield. And then the combine rolls, and then you smile again. So the big thing that this one does is I'm trying to hold it, and I should throw them around, but as you see, it's got a really small cob. So most of this depth, most of the yield from this hybrid is coming strictly from its kernel depth. It makes absolutely huge kernels. So as we kind of watching what that hybrid's able to do, it's extremely important to have nitrogen. Tom mentioned earlier that certain hybrids will bring up 70, 60% of their nitrogen intake can happen after it tassels or pollinates. This is one of those. It's got a good disease package, but if we think about one that's got a bunch of test weight and kernel depth that's going to put in late, the other part we got to make sure we keep it healthy. So as we think about managing this one for top end, also probably one that we need to look at, especially in our part of the world, with a fungicide, because we got to keep those leaves open and keep it so it can keep feeding and keep pulling out nutrients out of the ground.
So our internal kind of NCGA contest that we do locally, 5550, I think last year was 5 out of the top 7 entries. So for something that doesn't look very showy, again, like he said, that kernel depth, keep fungicide on it, allow that to continue to stretch out and leak, it hammers.
So the last one that I kind of have here, and then Tom's got a couple more, is 6606. This is kind of the same line that came out last year. We had a little more of this hybrid this year. This is for your highly productive soils. So as we think about that good dirt that doesn't get a lot of water on it, if we still get a lot of water backed in on it on that creek line, we'll probably still lean to 6618, but a little more variable, has a ton of yield potential. We got to take care of it, but ton of top end. I will say the one call out that we realized this year on it, it can be affected a little bit with wind. Never saw much green snap or it go down, but I know a bunch of us that had it out when we got all that wind about 45 days ago. This is a hybrid in the right sense goosenecked on us. But a ton of top end. You can see a little bit of tip back here. I think it's really in your areas, you got to look at it just north of here. It filled all the way to tip, and it should be awesome when we get out into it. But a super productive acre, high yield.
So I got 2 more here we'll get through, and hopefully we're not out of time yet. But the first one I'm going to talk about, I didn't grab it here. I'll have to get one for the next group. Will be Cropland 5760. You know, there's a couple ones we talked about, like, hey, that one's a little slow out of the ground, and it makes you nervous. Well, this hybrid, like, blazes out of the ground. This is the one I kind of like to go to because I cover all the seed brands, but then I'm also the only guy that covers Cropland. So when I see something that's got our bag on it and I see what it's doing out there like that and just taking off to the races, you know, it's like watching your kid, you know, outrun another kid or something. It's like, yeah, you know, you kind of like that. Well, 5760, by the time it hits about V3, it takes off. And by the time the corn is knee to waist high, it looks like it was planted 2 weeks earlier. I mean, it's just off to the races. So with that being said, that massive aggressive growth, it does get a little bit weak on the stalks if you get like a high wind event or something, but the green snap rating on it is good. It's just very high, or a very fast growth, and a lot of times that heavier winds comes earlier in the year. So I would say it wouldn't be necessarily a reason why I wouldn't plant it, but it would be just something that you could potentially see out of that hybrid. But it has truly been all about yield. I think when that thing came out, we had our first experience with it. It was an experimental. Every plot that we had it in, it was 10 bushel ahead of second place. And second place changed each time, but it was 10 bushel ahead of that. So We do have pretty good supply on it. We didn't have a whole lot of it this year. I think we had 700 bags across our territory, but next year the supply will be really good on that one. The other one I'm going to talk about is a little bit.
The other thing too, real quick, because I forgot to mention it, and we need to mention on that hybrid too. We talked about traits. This hybrid and 6606 are both Tricepta hybrids. So if we think about the elite above ground ear protection, you have it in both of those.
Yeah, it's a great big chunky ear on that one and the extra protection. The last one we'll talk about, I think the DeKalb guys broke it to us. I think our supply on this one is like 2%. And last year it was like 0.8% or something like that. So we really didn't improve a whole lot on supply. But this thing, it's a yield hog, so this would be, really something for you guys to really just take a look at this next year. It is a white cob. That's a little bit different for a lot of the stuff you see in the DeKalb line. Here's your 30,000 ear, and here's your 38,000. So it definitely shrunk up some, but that's still a pretty nice ear for 38,000. But on your pure offensive ground, your good creek bottoms, the things that you're the most excited about on the yield on, this one is a fantastic hybrid to put there. It's this one right here behind me. You can tell it's got a real pretty appearance to it, like a landlord corn or something like that. So we went through that about as fast as we possibly could, but we have that response to fungicide, the response to nitrogen, corn on corn, the response to population, all that on every single one of these hybrids. So when we match up to your management practices, we can certainly do that and make sure you guys are making the best out of your $100, $120 an acre seed decision. Is there any questions or anything? I think we're about out of time, but